Greetings from the heart of London. I'm actually right between Buckingham Palace, you're supposed to say Buckingham, swallow the H, and Whitehall and 10 Downing Street. I'm in the park. It's Christmas. It's gorgeous. People are out and about saying Merry Christmas to others. It's quite extraordinary. And I actually just wanted to do a quick intervention or an insight about Christmas. And I think especially this year with the pandemic and how it's isolated us from each other in more radical ways than we're used to. Although I think even before the pandemic, largely we consider ourselves as islands in society, and being an island can be lonely already. So I think in a way the pandemic exacerbates that basic loneliness that we may feel. Of course, we have family and such, but I did want to just think about Christmas. And regardless of whether you believe in the factual story of Jesus of Nazareth being born in a manger and so on, or even you don't even have to be Christian to get the insight. And the insight, I think, for me about Christmas is when you think about the poetic nature of the story, it actually can touch us very deeply at the core of our human condition. So if you think about it, what is the story? It's the story of an all-powerful God who created all things, let's say, and sits on high, the cosmic control of all knowledge and all knowing and all power and so on. But it's interesting with the Christmas story because you have this all-powerful being deciding willfully to give up, in some sense, that power in order to enter into the fragility of the human condition as a baby. And that, I think, is really interesting because, in a way, the Creator God becomes part of the pain and the suffering, the joys, and the whole gambit of what it means to be a human being. The nugget of truth there, therefore, in the Christmas story is something like a miracle, in the sense that if you give up your position of power, however meager or modest it may be, in order to connect with a deeper human condition other than that of your own, something special and even magical can happen. Now, I know we're all used to thinking about Christmas as buying stuff. In fact, the economy counts on it. And exchanging gifts, thinking about a gift that you'll give that might be slightly better than the gift you'll receive. And that whole gambit, that whole intersection and knot of given presents is itself, I think, as the anthropologist Marcel Mauss states, is itself riddled with a kind of deeper sense of power that one maintains even in the act of giving. But I think the difference between that and the Christmas narrative or myth or poem, let's call it, is that you don't give to receive. You sort of give up your position of power in order to enter into a deeper, more magical connection with others. And you can see this play out not just in the Christian telling of the story, the nativity, and ultimately the passion and death of Christ, the God who is Jesus of Nazareth, on the cross and so on, being crucified by, the principalities and so on. But you see it in other places in literature as well. Those other places would be something like, you think of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the classic story, written not too far actually from where I am, maybe a mile from where I'm standing right now. And in that story you have this very powerful, very wealthy man called, aptly enough, Scrooge, who in the process of one night is visited by three ghosts who in the end expose Scrooge to a world that he's not in control of. That is a world committed to the plight of others who may not have the privileges that we do. And by being visited, he's able to, I think, work through his own heart that turned callous and cold as steel when he was rejected in a marriage proposal as a young bachelor. And what happens through that night is a miracle, the Christmas miracle. And in a way that you can see him opening up to his worker and his sons, the son of the worker, Tim, Tiny Tim, and he's able to then see a different world entirely. By breaking open that callous heart, he can see a level of reality that is deeper and more, I think, rewarding than simply being closed off from the rest of the world and being secured by one's own power or position in society. Another interesting retelling of the Christmas story, what is something like a miracle, is through the famous film in the 30s, It's a Wonderful Life, played by Jimmy Stewart, who was the owner of a small bank, a community bank, and juxtaposed to his opponent, the antagonist, Mr. Potter, who, once again, is very secure in his life with wealth and wants to buy up Bedford Falls, the small town, and in that process undermine the connection with others in that community who, when they find each other, are able to work through differences and actually advance our connectivity together and thus become something like a miracle. And what happens is, of course, that the main character is played by Jimmy Stewart, is given a gift of seeing a world in which his character doesn't exist. And of course, that will never happen, but the insight is especially important. The insight being that if we weren't to exist, we could see a world that we're unable to give what we have to others and enter into a deeper level of reality, a level that becomes miraculous and mysterious and rewarding ultimately. One thinks of the famous line or book by the American monk, No One is an Island, Thomas Merton, who is echoing John Donne's metaphysical poem, No One is an Island unto themselves, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And the bell tolling is the bells ringing out in the community, signifying that one among us has passed on, is no longer with us. So the bell rings out and reminds us of our fragility in life. And when we think of the world, especially during our time with the hyperized ideologies, the separation of different parties, the breakdown of our common existence together as human beings, whether it's nationally or globally or locally, one sees that that if you persist in holding on and being protected by your very limited, isolated island, you end up dying inside with respect to the fuller expression of who we are as human beings. And so in the end, the miracle of Christmas happens when one gives up their own secured place. And by doing that, enter into a much more deeper, more meaningful reality of being able to share the plight of existence with others, knowing that we're not islands, isolated. We're not best, I think, manipulated by stories that we're being told time and again that it's just us versus everyone else. That in fact, a much more deeper, more magical reality, and more satisfying one, in my opinion, is when we enter into a space of connectivity that gives up maybe our position of power. In today's world where a handful of men control or have access to more than half the world's combined wealth, you can see how this narrative of self-isolation that's exemplified and amplified really in the pandemic space of 2020 and on into 2021, you can see how that creates fear, and that we live thus in a defensive mechanism, a defensive posture. But when you look back at the Christian story about a God who gives up that position of power to enter into the fragility of the world, then a miracle happens, a new way, a way that life gives us, that we might not have positions of power and control, but we have a better life. And if we just thought the Christian miracle would happen in the world where the handful of men who control all their wealth, and this isn't an ideology, this is simply just the deep, I think, nugget of truth in the Christian beautiful story that touches us somehow deeply inside. And if that were to happen, the ability for us as human beings to get along and peace on earth, goodwill expressed towards each other, could happen. And I think that's a miracle. And this, I think, this basic core of the Christian narrative or story or myth or poem, however you want to phrase it, is played out in the college that my colleagues and I started, a college that allows for others around the world who would never be able to afford to get a degree to do so through different technologies, online learning, and so on. And this opens up the possibility of the Western, like typical, like elite college or whatever, and it breaks that boundary down so that we can enter into a space that's connected to others who have different experiences around the world in different locations, different challenges. And by understanding and empathizing with those other challenges, the process of connecting and building an academic community and growing that community opens. So today, Christmas Day in London, I send you my very best, and I wish you all a miracle of the Christmas magic, let's say. So all the best, Merry Christmas, and peace and goodwill to all people.